Hello, and welcome to our webinar, Celebrating Indigenous Stories and Storytellers. I'm Maggie Reagan, Booklist Books for Youth Senior Editor and Managing Editor of Booklinks. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some technical details. A link to today's slide presentation was included in the reminder email you received from Zoom 1 hour ago. To download it, please open that email, scroll to the bottom, and click on the link located there. You can also download the slides by copying the URL on this screen into your web browser. If you have trouble accessing any materials, please contact us at webinars@booklistonline.com. The audience is in listen-only mode, but we welcome any questions you may have. On the bottom of your screen is a toolbar with a section for Q&A. If you have a question or need technical assistance, simply click Q&A and type your message into the box that appears. We will do our best to respond to all tech-related questions, and we will pass along all other questions to today's panelists so they can follow up with you after the webinar. Last but not least, Booklist offers closed captioning on all webinars. To enable or disable captions on your screen, please look for and click the live transcript icon on the toolbar mentioned earlier. From there, you can select show or hide subtitles from the menu that appears. If you choose to enable subtitles, you can adjust the size of the captions at any time by selecting subtitle settings. We have a wonderful presentation for you today, which includes a conversation between authors David Treuer, Traci Sorell, and Ria Thundercloud, moderated by Cindy Hohl. But first, we'll hear from Penguin Young Readers School and Library Marketing Manager Rachel Weiss about some fantastic titles. Rachel, take it away.
Thanks, Maggie. Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Weiss from the Penguin School and Library team, and I just wanted to shout out a few books from incredible Native creators before we hop into the panel. So first up, we have She Persisted, Maria Tallchief, which was written by Christine Day, whose other books include I Can Make a Promise and The Sea in Winter. In this installment in the She Persisted chapter book series, Christine tells the story of Maria Tallchief, America's first prima ballerina. Maria loved to dance, but she was told she might need to change her Osage name to one that sounded more Russian to make it as a professional ballerina. She refused and worked hard at dancing her best. She persisted. Next is another title in the She Persisted series written by our very own Traci Sorell, who you'll hear from in a few minutes. In this installment, Traci writes about Wilma Mankiller, the first woman principal chief of the Cherokee Nation. The descendant of Cherokee ancestors who had been forced to walk the Trail of Tears, Wilma Mankiller experienced her own forced removal from the land she grew up on as a child. As she got older and learned more about the injustices her people had faced, she dedicated her life to instilling pride in Native heritage and reclaiming Native rights. She persisted. Now I'm going to encourage everyone to take their phones out and scan the QR code on screen. My colleague Danielle created this gorgeous poster celebrating Traci's many incredible books and showing off the stunning artwork by Wishoyo Alvitre from At the Mountain's Base. The QR code will lead you to a Google form that you can fill out, and we'll send you a physical copy of this poster. And we'll also include this link in the follow-up email tomorrow in case you didn't catch it just now. And then the last book I'm talking about is Red's Dogs, which is a novel in verse by Joseph Bruchac. It's a contemporary story of a Wabanaki girl quarantining with her grandparents on their reservation and the dog that helps them get through it. It's very much a story about a kid during COVID. Meilon goes to school remotely, and while with her grandparents in quarantine, she learns more about them and their community. And while it is about those things, it's also about so much more. Res Dogs highlights the ways Meilon's community and other Native communities have cared for one another through plagues of the past and how they keep caring for one another today. And at 192 pages, all in verse, it's a quick, fantastic, and lyrical read. And I really wanted to highlight this because it received an honor from the 2022 Boston Globe Horn Book Awards this year. And finally, we have more amazing books by Native and Indigenous creators on our list. So if you take your phone out again, you can scan the QR code and download that book list. In the book list, you can click on each cover and learn more about the title. And again, this link will be included in the follow-up email for the webinar. And with that, I'm going to step off the stage and turn things over to our incredible moderator, Cindy Hohl. Cindy is a member of the Santee Sioux Nation and Director of Branch Operations at the Kansas City Public Library. As past president of the American Indian Library Association, she works with librarians all over North America, including other countries, in her work with the International Federation of Library Associations. Cindy serves on the executive board of the Freedom to Read Foundation and on the steering committee for the Joint Council of Librarians of Color Conference. As an ALA Spectrum Scholar, she strives to increase diversity in the library field through mentorship, recruitment, and advocacy. Over to you, Cindy.
Thank you so much. We appreciate this opportunity today to speak to these three wonderful authors covering their most recent work, as well as hearing a little bit about other books that they have written. I appreciate the introduction, Rachel, and we're going to jump right into introducing our authors, starting with Traci Sorell. Traci is a member of the Cherokee Nation and resides in Oklahoma. We're going to hear a bit about her new book, The Contenders. Hello, Traci, welcome.
Yo, hi, I'm so excited to be here and to share.
Well, we're grateful for your time today. And Traci's going to go over her book in a little bit. We're going to hear more about the story about these two baseball players, John Myers and Charles Bender, who back in 1911 became the first two Native American professional baseball players to face off in the World Series. And so you're going to hear more about that amazing story and also why it's so important to see representation in sports for all people. Specifically, the two characters in this story representing from the reservations, Charles coming from the White Earth Reservation in Minnesota, and John Myers from the Cahuilla Reservation in Southern California. So I'm interested to hear more about why you were inspired to share this story, and we're looking forward to more details, along with speaking about the great illustrations by Aragon Starr. I would also like to introduce Mr. David Treuer, who wrote The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee, Native America from 1890.
Hi, good to see you. Happy to be here.
Thank you, David. Welcome. We're so grateful that you're able to join us today. David has re-released this book for the young adult version, and that's a little bit of what we'll be discussing. This is an award-winning title, specifically hailed as one of the favorites of President Barack Obama in 2019. It was longlisted for the 2020 Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence and continues to be a New York Times bestseller. So we're very interested to hear more. The title of the book starting back 132 years, but the content covers tens of thousands of years, and why that is so significant for students and educators across the country to learn more about that history and to be able to understand the narrative and why that is so valuable in present day. We also have Ria Thundercloud here with us today. Welcome, Ria.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm so happy to be here.
Wonderful. We're so glad you could join us. And Ria is a member of the Ho-Chunk Nation and the Sandia Pueblo. So we're going to hear more about her beautiful story and, again, more phenomenal illustrations in her book. So I'm so looking forward to this conversation. We're going to take turns going around the room today. I have questions for each of you specific to your title, as well as general questions talking about how your work came to be. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to reach out to us after the presentation as well. We're all available online. So jumping into the contenders, Traci, we'd like to hear more about how this storyline came to be, and specifically what your interest was in highlighting this journey between these two professional baseball players.
Thank you, Cindy. I'm going to share my screen because it's a picture book. And so how can we enjoy a picture book if we don't have some visuals? Let me get over here for slideshow. There we go. So I thought I'd give you the entire jacket. This is the inside of the Polo Grounds Stadium in New York that John Myers, who was the catcher for the New York Giants, played in. But Contenders shines a light, as you mentioned, on two history-making Native professional baseball players. So there were a number of baseball players that played in Major League Baseball in the 1910s, especially. And so that's, of course, long before Jackie Robinson has integrated Major League Baseball for African Americans. They square off in the 1911 World Series, and it's dubbed in the press as the Indian versus Indian World Series. And I had not heard of this. Now, as a baseball fan, you know, my husband read about this and he said, "You've got to, you know, like write a book about this." He was like, "I know kids don't know about this." I was like, "I didn't know about this. I didn't know that there had been so many players. I knew that there had been people from my tribe who had, the Cherokee Nation, who had played in Major League Baseball, but I didn't realize there was such a concentration." And of course, we can put that as thanks to, in large part, the boarding school system, where a lot of these students were learning about the game. But the book follows Charles Bender, who, as you mentioned, is from the White Earth Ojibwe Reservation, and John Myers from the Kauai Reservation, which is the White Earth Reservations like northwestern Minnesota. The Kauai are east of Los Angeles, so between like Riverside and south of there, in the more kind of desert area of the Inland Empire. And one grows up learning the game on the reservation, and the other grows up learning about it because he's sent to religious and then a federal boarding school. And the approach of the book really is focused on that journey to the professional level of play, right? And how they actually meet in this game. And then, you know, what their experience is along the way. I am forever grateful that Aragon Starr agreed to illustrate this book. She is an incredibly gifted artist. I mean, you can see from the line work just on the cover, but the inside's going to blow you away. She is an enrolled citizen of the Kickapoo tribe. She's also Muskogee, Cherokee, and Seneca from her mother's side. And she just poured her soul into this book. I'm delighted that we have an entire all-women team that made this book. Jasmine Rivero, who is the art director for Kokila Imprint, is also a rabid baseball fan. So we all very much enjoyed working on this book. And then, of course, at the helm was publisher as well as editor Namrata Tripathi. So I've just very much enjoyed the time. So this is just a little kind of overview about both players. There's a picture of them together. So John Myers is on the left and Charles Bender is on the right. And as I mentioned, you know, one's a professional catcher, one's a pitcher. John also had the third highest batting average in the National League from 1911 to 1913. One of the other interesting things, there's so many interesting things about both of these men. John does not come into Major League Baseball until he's 28 years old. So just a powerhouse in terms of, you know, I mean, you think about if you're, you know, study the game, like what a catcher does, what a pitch, you know, in terms of, you know, just the physicality involved in that position, as well as then also leading his team in batting and being the third highest in the National League. He also was very vocal about injustices facing Native nations. And certainly when you have the Crazy Snake Rebellion, and he, you know, speaks out in the national press in support of Cheeto Harjo and other Muskogee citizens. Bender, on the other hand, he starts in the majors very young. He's only 19 and just an incredible pitcher. He's in the Major League, you know, Baseball Hall of Fame, and he invented a pitch that, you know, if you're watching baseball today, you know, people are still using, which is the slider. So I just was so impressed with both of them, how they put up with so much racism, you know, internally from their teams, from others, certainly from fans, and just bombarded with it in the press. And this is just another teaser of the end papers. So you can see where Aragon has incorporated some of the Ojibwe floral design with baseball. There's the Kuya basketry, and she's put the baseball player there with some of their designs. And then you see the outlines of both of the stadiums that they played at, but just all through the book. There's so many wonderful things. So it's a delight for young people. I mean, I say, and many people say, of course, picture books are for all ages. I think anyone will have a feast for their eyes, as they're enjoying the art and then looking at this story. But I'm excited to share it with young people. And of course, it'll be out right after we kick off Major League Baseball season next spring on April 11th. And with that, I will stop sharing.
Wonderful. Thank you, Traci. We appreciate that overview of how that story came to life, and also your work with the illustration team. It's wonderful to hear that project come together.
Yeah.
I'd like to move
Bookmaking
over.
is a team sport.
Yes, definitely. Well, I would like to move over to David now. David is a member of the Leech Lake Reservation, the Ojibwe Nation. And I'm curious as to also with Traci, you both chose to write books about enrolled members of other nations that are not in your community. How does that come to be when you're working through research and you're deciding on which story you would like to see told?
Well, first off, thanks for having me as part of this. And as was mentioned, I'm Ojibwe from the Leech Lake Reservation in northern Minnesota, kind of a sister reservation to White Earth. So Charles Bender, he's sort of a down-home guy from back in northern Minnesota. And my book, The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee, is really a pretty big history. It was published as an adult book, as sort of a regular title, but we wanted to turn it into a YA offering. I think for the same reason that I wanted to write it in the first place, which is that, in the American imagination, most of us Native people died when the frontier closed in 1890. Most Americans don't know or understand that we not only continue to exist, but we've live vibrant, interesting, complicated lives. And so when I was a kid and when I was in college and in the years thereafter, people were always surprised when I told them that I was from Leech Lake or that, I was Native, and they're like, well, that can't possibly be true. We killed you all. I heard this over and over again. And I kind of heard this in the curriculum too, such as it is for grade schools and high schools and college and so on, where we're always referred to in the past tense. The Lakota lived on the plains. The Ojibwe lived in the woodlands of the Great Lakes. Not that we live in the Great Plains or in the woodlands to this day. And so I looked around and there was no history published, of any kind, that looked at what Native people have been doing, how we've been living our lives, what we've been up to for the past 132 years. And so, as Toni Morrison says, if there's a book you really want to read and it doesn't exist, you have to write it. And so I guess I had to write it. And that said, it wasn't enough to just write about my tribe. I wanted to write about people all over the country. And so it was a lot of traveling. But it was also a lot of fun. I got to hang out with Native people all over the country, from Florida to Washington State, Montana to Oklahoma. It was incredible. It was a lot of fun. So, that's a little bit about the book and a little bit about me.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, David. We really appreciate you joining us today. I'm going to ask you some more tough questions here in a little bit. All right, Ria, if we could, I would love to talk a bit about your inspiration as well. We've so far heard about sports and representation and why that matters, why that's important, existence as modern people in modern times. How does your story highlighting dance, the history, and that beautiful story of the character, how did that all come to play?
Okay, I'm going to share my screen as well to kind of talk a little bit about my experience, since this is a children's picture book as well. Let's see here. So this is the cover. Well, yes, my name is Ria Thundercloud. I'm from the Ho-Chunk Nation, San Diego Pueblo, and it's quite an honor to write about dance. This was my own personal journey as a dancer, and how I went professional at a very young age, but how dance has grounded me since I started off as a traditional dancer, a powwow dancer and a corn dancer from, my parents. My parents actually met during the Urban Relocation Act in 1970s. So they both met in Chicago. So that's why I am two completely different tribes. And I hold really close kinship to both of my tribes. So it's kind of cool to kind of share the powwow experience in the powwow world, because it's its own world. Like, it's just an amazing, I'm so grateful to grow up in the powwow world. But I just feel like a children's picture book really is significant because it validates and it authenticizes our own experiences as Indigenous people. So regardless of what kind of dance you're into, this is really something, just a story that is amazing for us as Indigenous people to see and kind of experience and feel that our own experiences and our upbringing is extremely awesome and valid and amazing, and our stories are unique. So I just feel that the picture book really opened a lot of doors, because it's an amazing time to grow up in a world where children have representation of their own lives, and it really validates who we are as people and dancing. So dancing is the one thing that has grounded me throughout my entire travels. I could be in the most Eurocentric country, and ballet is a very Eurocentric art to be a part of. So being able to kind of ground myself and listen to powwow songs and stuff like that in my travels is something that has always been able to basically ground me anywhere, no matter where I'm at in the entire world. So yeah, I will stop.
Great, thank you. Well, we appreciate you sharing your slides, and again, more beautiful illustrations that readers will certainly enjoy. So we appreciate you sharing that overview. All right, I'm going to ask Traci to come back on. And again, I'm going to ask a question for all of you, and I would like for you to take your time in answering that. But why is it so important for students to be able to see themselves in a picture book, or to be able to dream about what that career could look like for them?
Well, I think, what I found with this book, and then certainly previously in Classified, the story of Mary Golda Ross, Cherokee Aerospace Engineer, is that a lot of times, young people and even adults don't know other people have already blazed these trails. They've already done this work. They've been in these spaces. And so, in essence, there's a place that's already been set for you, to go into. I mean, sometimes, we are the first to do something in our lives, but certainly in the case of professional athletes in Major League Baseball, there were many men who had already been there. So, and we have 4 Cherokee Nation citizens right now who are playing Major League Baseball, and they're all right-handed pitchers, like Charles Bender. So my goal in whatever I'm doing is to center Native people, whoever the book is about, their experiences, whether that's, again, whether I'm writing fiction or nonfiction, that's who's centered. Because I always assume that people from those tribes and communities will be reading the book, and so I want their young people to feel a sense of connection, right, to that story. And for those who aren't, maybe from another Native nation or non-Native, to get some insight into what other people have lived. And so it's important, like I say, with this book, because many people have different journeys about how they end up being in places to become noteworthy athletes, leaders, whatever. But oftentimes, because of the way our education system has been structured here, we're just completely invisible. And certainly that's the case with these two men, and the fact that they made history playing against each other in the World Series at a time when many others were playing as well. So 2 years after this, Jim Thorpe joins the New York Giants, and he's John Mayer's teammate. Now Thorpe wasn't as gifted at baseball as he was at other sports, but he still did pretty decent in the majors. And so that is what I hope that young people see, is that it's like, oh, this isn't so out of reach. People have already paved the way here.
That's great. Thank you. I love that your goal is to always center Native people. I think that that's important. And I hope that every group has someone as talented as you are and our other authors on this discussion today that's able to represent them and share those stories with the world.
Mado, thank you.
Thank you. So David, I have the next question for you. In writing The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee, was the goal for this to become required reading? Did you talk to educators about what the holes were that were missing in what was available as they planned their curriculum?
Well, ask any writer what their goal is, and it's to be required reading by every person on the planet. And I didn't talk to educators about what the gaps were. I mean, I am an educator, and I know what the gaps are. I also know that sort of growing up, the way I was represented in both popular culture and in history was, the way Indians were represented was just in the process of dying. Either we were getting shot off our horses in Westerns, or we got a brief mention in textbooks about how, we were once here and we did things, but then we all died. That's as much airtime, and that's the kind of airtime that we got. And that was patently obvious to me. The best-selling book of Native American history ever published is D. Brown's Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, published in 1970. It has sold millions of copies. It's been translated into 17 languages. It's never been out of print. And on the first page of that book, D. Brown says, my book is about the American West. I start in 1850 at the beginning of the Plains Wars, and I end in 1890 at the massacre at Wounded Knee Creek. And now I'm going to quote, where the culture and civilization of the American Indian was destroyed. Full stop. That's the message that people of all ages around the world have been getting about us and our existence. So the gap is obvious. People think we're gone. And if people can admit that we're not gone, all that they think we're up to, and I think what we think we're up to too, is not really living, not really making history. We're merely victims of history. And that doesn't feel particularly accurate to me. I think Native people have been making history all along. Like, for instance, the first act of the colonists in Boston was to dump tea in Boston Harbor, but they did so dressed as Mohawk Indians. Because one of the main reasons the colonists went to war with Britain was over the question of who got to settle and exploit the land to the west of the 13 colonies. Our existence was baked into the Revolutionary War, and after the Revolution, when the colonists were looking for a form of government never before seen on Earth, to whom did they turn? To the Iroquois Confederacy. And it's on the Iroquois Confederacy that our separation of powers is based. So we not only have been making history, we've been a part of it, not just victims of it. And that was pretty clear. So, and I wanted to explore that. I wanted to see that for myself. I wanted my kids to see that. And I wanted my readers, Native and non-Native, to see that. Well,
David, we all commend you for that goal, because that that's really deep to be able to identify legendary work and say, you know what, I think that there's an additional storyline to be told. There are more themes to explore. And this discussion today just shows how that expansion is inclusive and it's valuable and it's necessary, whether that's learning about governmental systems or how people are living as traditional people in modern times, all the way to looking through education to enrichment, to enhancement of lifestyle. How do we explore enjoying sports together? How do we explore taking on new goals and creating new dreams? That's really the body of work of all of our authors today. And it's something that is so important. And I have great respect for all of you for taking on these stories. Ria, I have a question for you. Hi. So in regard to your love of dance and how you got into that, what recommendations do you have for, say, a young student who maybe doesn't have access to a local dance studio, or they don't know of anyone who dances in their community? How would you recommend that they get started?
I would suggest just kind of doing your own research and really using, we have a lot of modern tools today, like we have YouTube, we have the internet, and I feel like that's the best way to kind of get connected and plugged in. Just kind of listening to different powwow songs, music, and just being in your body. I say that dance is something that is so fluid. There's no right or wrong way to do it. So even if there is no access, even if it feels weird, just do it, because dance is so healing and you can really step into your body and out of your head when you move and articulate. And it's kind of reclaiming a lot of different body parts that as Indigenous people have really kind of lost. As far as media wise, being an Indigenous woman, there is a lot of commodification and fetishization happening as Indigenous women, but we're reclaiming those body parts. We're taking our sovereignty, our body sovereignty back when we're just stepping into our bodies and moving it in whatever way feels good. So I just say, you know, however, if there's no access, no classes, the internet is a really great source. And a lot of dancers, you know, are self-taught and they're just tapping into the internet and utilizing what we had to learn themselves and teach themselves, which I think is amazing, because being your own teacher, it just feels so validating when you're kind of a self-made dancer and you learn on your own. And it is very empowering to, you know, reclaim your body sovereignty in that way. So I really would just say the internet is honestly a great source. And there's so many amazing dancers that are on YouTube and the internet. It's just so accessible.
Thank you, Ria. And we appreciate you bringing up the topic of body sovereignty and empowering people to explore what that means for them. You also briefly talked about the powwow world. Could you explain that a little bit more for those who are interested and want to learn more about the powwow trail, the powwow circuit, and what that means?
Yeah, so the powwow circuit, the powwow trail, there's a lot of ways to kind of explain going on the trail is what we call it. And that's basically where when I grew up and experiencing powwows as like a young child, a young adult, it's such a communal thing. We're so interconnected as Indigenous people, and it really becomes normal to have that communal feeling where you can just stay with friends and family along the way, and you make friends along the way as well. But it's basically where you travel from powwow to powwow to powwow to powwow. And the powwow trail, right now, there's the Cali trail happening right now, which is down in Morongo, Pechanga. They got all those tribes in California where they're all having powwows. So if you're on the Cali circuit right now, which is happening, there's a powwow coming up this weekend somewhere in California, but it's basically where, yeah, you just jump in your car and you travel from powwow to powwow and you dance and you make friends and you stay with friends and family, or you camp, or I mean, now all these casinos have resorts and hotels. So POWs are changing a little bit now because we have so much more access to hotels. And the POW trail is something that's really amazing. It's really fun, and it's really communal. It really, really normalizes just having that true Indigenous hospitality, which is opening our homes. And there is no expectations whatsoever, just as long as we have a safe place to stay. And I think it's more about connection when it comes to powwows. It's about family, community.
I love that. Thank you, Ria. I appreciate you sharing more about tribal hospitality and the culture that surrounds that most beautiful time of the year, the community gathering. It's something that is so important. And it's also a very sacred time for that community to get together, to honor their elders, to pray for each other, the land, animals. It's something that is so wonderful to participate in. And we always encourage everyone. That's something that's important to share. Everyone is welcome to attend powwows. There are protocols that we follow. Did you want to speak to that at all?
Yeah, I mean, powwows are a celebration for everyone. So you don't have to be Native to go to powwows. I would suggest everyone to go to a powwow once in their lifetime. It's beautiful, and you have to be there live to really experience the magic, to hear the drums, to see the dancers, hear the bells. We do have intertribals, and that's just where the drums take turns, and anybody can dance, anybody can walk. So I encourage everyone to just check out a powwow. There's intertribals, and the MC will say intertribal time, and anybody can get on the arena, dance, and be amongst the dancers, and just kind of like walk with them. And we do have friendship dances, we have round dances, at these powwows. So we do celebrate, and we constantly just, want to have that really sense of community. And we love visitors, spectators. It just makes the powwow so much more, because it's amazing to share that with everyone.
Thank you, Ria. So Traci, I would like to circle back to you. Is there anything else that we should hear about Contenders? Not a spoiler, of course. Or would you like to move on to one of your other books that you have written?
I will just say that again, that I think everyone's going to be wowed by Aragon's art, and how, when you work on a book and you have this idea, if you're just the writer, you don't have any idea how that's going to look in the real art. But the way that she, like I say, incorporates both of their tribal identities into the book, and very much represents the cities that they play in, and then just also shares about other Native baseball players in there. I think it's the complete package of how she's taken my words, and as all picture book illustrators do, usually tell more than 50% of the story. And so there's so much richness there. You had mentioned Wilma Mankiller before, and Ria mentioned that her parents, have relocated. So while we've been talking about like history of people being trailblazers and stuff, there are definitely people who are trailblazers across our Native nations because of a very difficult time in our history of the Termination and Relocation Act. And my late friend Charlene Willing McManus wrote about that in Indian No More. And just before she died from cancer, she asked me to finish the revisions and make sure that the book was ready to be published, which I did with the help of many other people. So I'm grateful that book is out in the world. Similarly, next week, Wilma Mankiller, or in 2 weeks, Wilma Mankiller comes out. And that book is also someone who's experienced relocation. And while that was a difficult time period for her growing up, I don't think we would have Wilma Mankiller doing all the things she did had she not, lived here on the reservation for most of her childhood, and then goes to the Bay Area and sees all these other Native people displaced as well, and really understands the power of that broader thing, like David was talking about. there's so much that we know as people, but other people don't necessarily know about that. The larger narrative is very confined, and it generally is gone by 1900. So we have all these people doing incredible things throughout the 20th century and 21st century, but that really is lost for the most part. And so I'm excited for young people to read about Wilma and just to see what her childhood was like, and how through these experiences, she very much internalized being someone who was working for solutions, who was working to empower those around her, whether that was women, elders, the entire Cherokee Nation, and then beyond, other Native nations, and the influence she had on world leaders.
Well, thank you. That is just such a wonderful tribute, and we're so excited to get to read that when that comes out as well. Wilma Mankiller, of course, is known worldwide for her leadership.
Yeah.
And another thing to explore is how there are a lot of matrilineal societies in Native culture where Native leaders can be women. What do you think the main point is that readers should take away from hearing about Wilma's dedication to her people?
Well, she definitely is tapping back into that whole matrilocal focus of Cherokee people, which, with colonization, through Christianization and forced education in boarding schools, really has focused on instilling kind of a patriarchal viewpoint. And so, she was not supported by some men and women within our nation when she ran. But yet she has been such a role model, for myself since childhood, as well as many other Cherokee, people my age and younger. So I'm excited for that. I'm also excited for young people to see a leader that is different than what we generally get presented as a leader. And I'm not just talking about someone that's a woman, but also someone that was not educated at an Ivy League school, that did not grow up with, a lot of means, right? She grew up in poverty, which is why her, father, when they started talking about the relocation program, said, okay, maybe this is a better way for us, for, her parents to take care of their kids. They had a growing family. They ended up having 11 children. And so they, saw that as an economic way to assist their family. But, she wasn't a great student in school. And it wasn't because she wasn't intelligent. It was because she encountered a school system that was not made for her, right? She is completely erased in that environment. So many of our Native children experience that. And so many of them are not coming from places where they're going to end up going to private schools or even aspire to go to those things, and they can do incredible things for their Native nation, for, the broader humanity. And so that's what I'm really excited about with this book, is that, that's also a narrative we get fed in this country too, is that leaders are of a certain class or education, background. And that's just not the case, certainly with Wilma and many others that I know.
Excellent points. Thank you very much. David, if you would rejoin us.
Right here all along.
Hello. So I have read your book a couple of times now, and I learn something new every time. To me, it's fascinating when you go back to the history of that story and when it needed to be told. Do you think that with your book, do you consider your book a sequel to Dee Brown's?
I think of my book as a counter narrative in answer to Dee Brown's book.
Okay.
Very
so
much.
For a lot of us who have read Dee's and then your work, it really introduces and expands that knowledge base for anyone to be able to understand more about the federal government system. Would you tell us what a treaty is and why that is significant to the storyline?
Sure. It's crazy, like most American children are at 7th grade, right? They take a civics class, and they learn how city governments are set up and townships and counties, and then states, and then the federal government. They learn about the judicial and the executive and the legislative and all that stuff. But you know what they don't learn? And you know what we don't even learn? Those of us who were, raised on our reservations, we don't learn about tribal constitutions, right? And that's a problem, So we don't learn about treaties. Most school children will emerge from school never having read a treaty, which are some of the most important organizing and civic documents, among other things, in this country. They shape so much, But a treaty is an agreement made between two sovereign nations. That's the most basic definition of a treaty you can get, The Treaty of Paris, the Treaty of Ghent, the Treaty of Versailles, right? Treaty of Versailles sort of ended the First World War. Those were all treaties made between sovereign nations, as were the Treaty of Fort Pitt, the first Treaty of Fort Laramie, the second Treaty of Fort Laramie, the Treaty of Prairie du Chien, all these. There are hundreds upon hundreds of treaties which have served to shape Native nations, but also shape the American nation. And school kids never read them, which is too bad. You know what else is crazy? In 1900, according to the US Census, there were roughly 200,000 Native American people left alive in this country, down from 15, 20, 30 million. The estimates vary at the time of first contact. Significant drop, right? So 200,000 in 1900. Do you know how many were on the 2020 census? Native people? 6 million. There are twice as many people that identify as Native as those who identify as Muslim American in our country today. There are slightly more Native people than there are Jewish Americans in our country today. Not that we would know this from our history, not that we would know this from popular media, not that we would know this from much of anything, but it's a fact, So treaties are important to know, but hey, guess what? We are shaping these places in which we live now, and it would be really good if people knew something about that. And not just because, there's this tendency for people to tune into Native stories as a kind of liberal gesture. Like, hey, I should know, it's Native American History Month coming up in November. I should know something. As a kind of liberal social act. But there's a better reason to read Native stories and to know Native history. You can't understand American history unless you know Native history. It's that simple. And so, that is a push, not just for my book, but for all these others, that we're talking about today, and all the other ones, out there that we're not. There's so much to read now. There's so much to study. There's so much to know. And there's so many reasons to do it.
Thank you. Those are all very good points. So for those who aren't familiar with the treaty itself, the treaty is the rights that the Indians gave to the federal government. People are often confused by that, and they think it's the other way around. But as you read David's story and you learn more about what is happening throughout Indian country, which is also another federal term, you'll find out that unfortunately none of the treaties were upheld. So what does that mean for Native Americans in modern times when you have enrolled member status in a sovereign nation that oftentimes is not recognized as an independent governance within local government? You could have state representatives who aren't familiar with the rights of Native people on their lands. And we're also citizens of the United States. It sounds like it would be a trifecta, except for there's so much misinformation or disinformation. What do you think we can do as a society to continue to encourage people to understand the rights of Native people on our Indigenous soil?
Well, first, I'd like to say that, all our treaties weren't broken. Many of them were, and many were bent, and many were damaged, and many were abrogated, and many were amended, and so on and so forth. But not all broken, you know. I mean, if the federal government had its way, there wouldn't be any Native people at all, administratively or culturally, right? The fact that we exist still, you know, that our Native nations are intact still, that we have our own governance, courts, police, all sorts of things, you know, is proof that we exist, you know, and that not simply, right, you know, and that our treaties have been, to a certain extent, but not often enough, respected, you know. And what can our society do? I'm not so sure. I'm a little bit of a cynic, you know, but I am always pleased by the ways in which, you know, Native people, we continue to make people pay attention to things, you know, like the you know, the fight against the pipeline at Standing Rock, you know, was not, as the formal tribal chairman, David Archambault III of Standing Rock, characterized it, was not simply a matter of cowboys versus Indians or the white man keeping the Native person down again. It wasn't like that. I disagree with him in that assessment. You know, what we saw at Standing Rock was Native people taking the fight for our land and for the common good and fighting that fight on behalf of all Americans. You know, what we saw at Standing Rock was corporate greed versus the common good. That's what we saw. And it was Native people leading that fight. You know, so we're still out there, right? We're still making people pay attention, you know, and, you know, beware if you don't. Did you know at Red Lake Reservation, the voter turnout, that's in Minnesota, by the way, another sister reservation to mine. Voter turnout is 90% for local, state, and federal elections. 90% of people show up to vote. And they vote 90% Democratic. The Native vote is what swung Arizona. The Native vote is what swung Minnesota for Al Franken. That's a little while ago, but, you know, we're still here. We're still affecting change. So anyway.
We are definitely still here, David. Thank you for saying that.
And I think the increasing representation in trade literature, right, that you see, especially in the last 5 to 6 years, where there has been, you know, I didn't know at the time I started writing, or others, that this collective of people were like, what can we do? Because unfortunately, we haven't been able to change national curriculum. You know, in some states, it is mandated. And so those states are working with various Native nations to put curriculum together. And that's helpful, but that's not a nationwide effort. And so it will take adaptations of books for adults, you know, coming to teens like David's, or I haven't really seen too many memoir and picture books like Ria's, you know, or whatever, you know, other Native creatives may put forward. Those are going to be what help shine a light on our experiences, you know, in fiction and in nonfiction, because we don't have other options within curriculum that really are giving voice to our realities in a way that we're centered and represented as whole people. And it also is adhering to what the truths are, you know. I mean, the fact that, yes, we did sign over 400 treaties in this country, and those are, you know, the United States is still bound by those, right? I mean, you know, we have land, we have rules, we have all kinds of things that come about because of that. And so really it is in trade literature at this point that you're going to know about those things from, you know, a K-12 type setting. I am ecstatic about the rise of more representation in popular, you know, artistic endeavors like song and TV and film, et cetera. I mean, there is definitely more access on those fronts, and just shaping, you know, our narratives ourselves instead of someone else telling our story. But I mean, it's a collective push. And certainly during the pandemic, you saw the tribes, regardless of what was going on in the states around them, mobilize to save lives. And they weren't just worried about, vaccinating and taking care of people, on their reservation or in their communities. They were helping everyone, because to David's point about Standing Rock, it's like, we recognize that, those boundaries are artificial and were created, in these documents, but ultimately we all have to live on the same planet, drinking the water, living with what the earth provides. And other people don't seem to take in that message in the way that we are very much aware of what's happening. And it's our shared responsibility to engage.
Miniwi Choni, water is life. Thank you for bringing that up. We have a question from the audience, and I would like all three of you to answer this if you could. How can educators best participate and uplift Native experiences without engaging in cultural appropriation?
I will say quickly, and then I'll throw it to them. Please share our stories, our histories, works all year long. I realize that there's the focus between Indigenous Peoples Day and the end of November, that 7-week time period where we are in the spotlight. But honestly, all of our stuff can be shared all year long. There's just, so much. When you have over 570 just federally recognized tribes alone, there's a lot that you can do. So whatever.
Yeah, I don't think the risk is appropriation, I think we've come a long way, but just a couple do's and don'ts. Don't do headdresses at Thanksgiving. Don't do face paint, and don't use the past tense. In terms of like the fear of like appropriating, like I presume, that no educator is going to try and attempt like a Native ceremony, quote unquote, in their class. They're not going to speak for Native people in their class, right? It's a fine line, but once you know it's there, it's not so hard. Speaking for someone is bad. Speaking of someone, not so bad. Speaking for, speaking of, there are big differences, and that line is I think, pretty intuitive.
Thank you, David. Ria, do you have one last word of advice for educators?
I just think that there is a boom in the literary forefront when it comes to Indigenous authors. And as a children's author, there is less than 1% of Indigenous representation. So having these in classrooms is a really big deal, because that's where we feel like the cards are stacked against us, because in education, we don't have a lot of history or highlighted Indigenous history at all. So to have this literary context in classrooms, I think is a game changer. It really does validate who we are as Indigenous people. And it opens up space for a conversation to be had and to kind of learn and just for people to educate themselves and, for kids to feel comfortable in their own skin and to feel validated and represented. So it really does matter to have Indigenous authors and illustrators and these types of books in the classrooms, because it really does authenticize who we are. And something as simple as just talking about dance really is amazing. It really validates our upbringing and our life. And it really honors that, because there's really not a lot of books out there that just honor us as Indigenous people. So I would just encourage everyone to have some sort of Indigenous literary anything in classrooms. It really does make a difference. And it's nice to have that for these future generations and for today, for all the kids.
Well, thank you so much. Traci, David, Ria, we see you, we recognize you. We thank you for gathering with us today in a good way. We could have gone on another hour or two. Representation,
no doubt. Thank you
so
all
important.
so much.
We appreciate it. Back to Maggie with Penguin Young Readers. And we would like to say thank you again to Penguin for sponsoring this webinar today.
Thank you all so much. Traci, David, Ria, Cindy, that was a beautiful conversation, and we so appreciate you all being here to share that with us. And thank you, Rachel at Penguin, for kicking us off at the beginning and for showing us all these wonderful titles. Tomorrow, all attendees will receive an email containing links to today's slide presentation, certificate of completion, and video recording. For more about Booklist webinars, be sure to visit www.booklistonline.com/webinars, where you can view archives of past webinars and register for upcoming ones, like those you see here. Now you can share Booklist love with everyone connected to your school district, library system, or higher learning institution. Booklist Online Unlimited offers just that: unlimited simultaneous access to 30 years worth of review and article archives, plus digital editions of all of Booklist publications. For pricing and other questions, visit www.booklistonline.com/subscribe. Have you heard? Booklist Reader, our new magazine that offers reading recommendations to patrons of all ages, is coming to print this January. Go to bit.ly/booklistreader in print to find out how you can order print copies in bulk for your library. Already have a Booklist subscription? You can share the latest issue now. Go to our website for more details. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, and one more huge thank you to our panelists and our sponsor, Penguin Young Readers. This concludes today's webinar. See you next time.